Now let me guess, you hopped on the old interwebs to find the perfect video to show you how to locate, remove, and replace the fuel filter on your Chevy Duramax. Well, good news, brother, I have just the video for you. I'll show you the procedure I use to replace the Duramax's fuel filter, bleed and prime the fuel system, as well as the fuel filter life reset procedure for any trim Silverado. So just kick back, crack a cold one, and let's talk about it. I'd like to welcome you if you're new to the channel. I'm Danny with Escape Power Sports, and today we're going to be adding some basic maintenance videos to our step-by-step how-to video playlist for your Chevy Silverado. And in this video, I want to share with you all the step-by-step procedure I use to change the fuel filter on a 6.6 liter Chevy Duramax. Should be a relatively straightforward 3-beer job. So let's get started. And feel free to pause the video on any of these slides to see the tools, parts, and beers required to get this critical piece of diesel maintenance done smoothly and keep your Duramax running strong for many miles to come. So to get this straightforward 3-beer job started, I like to remove the front passenger side inner fender well to get full access to the fuel filter and the water and fuel sensor plug attached to it. And on my truck, the inner fender wells are held in with these 7 small 7mm screws and several pop rivets. But if you got one of those new fancier trucks with the felt liner, I believe it's held in with a bunch of Torx T15 star bolts. Or my truck's liner was held in with 7 of those screws before someone came in and over torqued and broke the majority of the screws off in the holes with an impact. 2 out of 7 ain't bad. And I find a cheap set of pop rivet pliers works best for removing those large plastic pop rivets, but you can remove these in a similar fashion with a beefy flathead screwdriver if that's what you've got handy. And something to be aware of as you remove the fender liner is that the truck's wiring harness might have some clips on it securing the wiring harness to the back of that fender liner. That will need to be unplugged as we lower the fender liner if your harness clips ain't broke yet. And I forgot my fenders held in all custom like with some zip ties under it, but it's out of the way enough. And as you can see, our fuel filter is right here. And before we actually remove that fuel filter, we'll need to unplug the water and fuel sensor attached to it by pushing the little tab in. And since it's the only wire coming out of the bottom of the fuel filter, you really can't miss it.
Gotta push while you pull, I think. There it goes. And you'll hear that tab click.
Then we're clear to unscrew the fuel filter itself counterclockwise, taking any precautions you deem necessary to prepare for some spilled diesel. And if that was stuck on there a little worse, we could get away with using a oil filter wrench like you would for an oil filter. Like I said, she might spill a little diesel. Thought maybe I could show you a little bit better how to unplug this sensor. All we're doing is pushing that tab while we pull out to unhook that little latch. I don't know if you can see it, but you push that tab while you unplug. Now it's time to remove that little white plastic cap with the wire coming out of it we unplugged earlier. That's on the end of the old fuel filter. And I believe this little plastic cap to be the water and fuel sensor. And of course there's a special tool out there you can buy and a special wrench to remove it. But if you're cheap like me and careful enough, a large set of pliers opened up or a set of vice grips should get this little plastic part loose without stripping or breaking it. Just knock her loose hopefully without stripping it. Oh yeah, there she goes. Nice. Very nice. Should just unscrew counterclockwise from the old filter, because we're actually going to reuse this water and fuel important looking sensor thing here. And that's kind of dirty in there. Let's clean it up with some electronics cleaner. I'm not sure if you could get away with parts cleaner on this or if it might mess up the sensor or not. I feel a little more comfortable using the electronics cleaner. But you know, if y'all have a little more experience or knowledge on this, just comment below and let me know the proper way to clean this. But cool, that's out. And I chose to go with the AC Delco part number 3018 for this fuel filter change because it's a budget-friendly option when I order it from Amazon, and because I believe it's the original equipment the manufacturer suggests using for these 2001 to 2016 Duramaxes. Should come with both of the replacement gaskets. Let's see if they're in there. So our new fuel filter came with these 2 gaskets, and this bigger one is going to go on the side that's going to screw into the truck. Yep, seats in there pretty nice. Let's use some diesel as a nice little lubricant, make sure we get a good seal on there, but that ought to work pretty good. Now the little one goes on our water and fuel separator sensor here, so we're going to need to get that old one off to get this new one on. A little screwdriver or pick or something ought to do the trick. It's kind of gross under there. And we'll just slide our new one on like so. And I'll be sure to link both this AC Delco fuel filter and a few tools I think you might find helpful for this job in the description below.
And again, I like to lube her up with whatever's available, grease, oil. In this case, diesel's always handy when you're doing this job anyhow. So she should just screw right into our old filter here. Nice and easy, no cross threading or nothing. Alright, well, we made contact there. So let's keep going another, I don't know, half a turn, 3/4 maybe. Don't want to strip it, of course, but don't want any fuel leaks either. Yeah, maybe another half a turn after contact. And that looks pretty damn well sealed.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Got her new O-ring up here. Let's go slap her back in the truck.
Alright, y'all, at this point in the video, there's something I kind of want to address real quick. And that is whether or not to put fuel into the fuel filter before we put in the truck. In the past, I've always filled up the fuel filter with diesel out of this can before I screwed it back in to make priming it and getting this filled up before we crank up the truck a lot easier. Recently, I stopped doing that because in the past, after a couple fuel filter changes, I'd see a notification on the dash, water and fuel service required, and that kind of scared me a lot. And I got to thinking about why maybe that was happening. And my best guess is that these diesel cans will sit out in the yard and get rained on, this, that, or the other, and might end up with dirty diesel. You know, there might be water, other contaminants, these little gaskets. Anyway, I don't want to take any chances of sending dirty fuel straight into the injectors. So as long as we prime it and bleed the air out of the system correctly, we should be able to get this filled up before we start up the truck without actually pouring any dirty diesel into it. Just my thoughts on that. That's how I do it. Comment below how you do it, but let's get right back into it. And if you're like me, it'll be fairly difficult to get it to thread on the first couple times you try this job. But just have some patience and maybe keep an extra frustration beer handy, and you'll get it lined up and back on there in no time. And with our plastic water and fuel sensor securely threaded on, and our 2 new rubber gaskets lubed up and installed on our new fuel filter, we can reattach it by carefully aligning it with the housing before threading it on by hand clockwise. And we'll keep going until the rubber O-ring makes contact with the fuel filter housing.
Alright, so we made contact, now we gotta go another 1/4 turn.
And then we can use an oil filter wrench or some man strength to get another 1/4 turn after the rubber gasket has made contact with the housing.
Alright, that's about a 1/4 turn. If you look up under there, it looks to be sealed in pretty good.
Then we can just plug the water and fuel sensor back in. And fortunately, with the orientation of the clip on this plug, there's really no way to plug it in backwards. And I'll know it's secure when I hear it click into place.
Yeah, hear it click. And that should be in there. Now we got a primer. Oh, the rain's coming. Good thing we built this little shed. We'll be posting the how-to on the build of this shed here shortly as well.
And if you pop the hood on that sexy Chevy, you'll notice the primer bulb and bleeder screw are right there on the top of the fuel filter housing directly above where we installed our new fuel filter. And I prefer to remove this L section of the intake to get better access to these parts because we can easily remove it by loosening the 2 hose clamps with a flathead screwdriver, and it'll give us full access to the top of the fuel filter housing. And maybe this way we'll spill a little less fuel while we're bleeding the system, and I definitely prefer not having to contort my wrist up under that tube to prime the bulb on this LML.
And it looks like we're a little low on coolant, so top that off while we're at it too. Don't want to do this when the motor's real hot. Fortunately, it's cold. And a funnel's probably suggested. And that's just our O'Reilly's Dex Cool. These motors like the Dex Cool. With both of our clamps nice and loose, this should just pop right off. Starting on this side, yep, and then come around there. Yeah. Boom! We can see our fuel filter housing there. Can you see it? I'm gonna get a light in here. And as you can see, there's our fuel filter housing. We got our priming bulb there and our bleeder screw here. And what I like to do is just give this thing some pumps.
Might take a bunch since we didn't put any fuel in the filter.
But I'm gonna just pump it until it gets hard. Here, I need something to stand on. I'm not tall enough. Oh, much better.
And after pumping on that primer bulb a good 20 or so pumps, or until it gets harder to push down, whichever comes first, I'll loosen the bleeder screw with a flathead screwdriver to release any bubbles or air in the fuel system, and close it back up as quickly as I can when I see a steady stream of fuel coming out of the bleeder screw.
Alright, I found the flathead hose in my pocket. But we're just going to crack this loose. I hope y'all be able to see the diesel. There's a half turn, nothing coming out yet. Right around a full turn.
Still nothing coming out. Oh, there it goes. You saw how it was just air at first and now it's steady diesel. Let's close that back up.
And I'll repeat this priming and bleeding procedure until I don't see any bubbles coming out with the fuel whenever I loosen the bleeder screw.
Not really. Crack her loose again, see if there's any more.
And I've found in the past that a pump or two with the bleeder open will expedite this bleeding process, but it'll also squirt quite a bit of diesel all over our engine.
Nope, just straight diesel.
So with no more bubbles, I'll give her one last set of pumps before we try and crank her up. And it seemed like old Bertha needed a few more pumps than usual to hold a prime, but eventually that bulb did firm up and get harder to press. But before we go sucking all kinds of dirt and shit directly into the motor, I suppose we ought to try and wrestle this intake all the way back on. And I found it's easier to install the back side of it first, and then try and shimmy the front side of this tube all the way around that opening for the airbox.
Turns out it's easier if you put that side on first, and then this side I just found out after a few minutes of wrestling with her.
An 8mm or a 5/16 socket can also tighten these hose clamps, and it'll do it a lot faster than a screwdriver. And at this point, before we go taking off of the mountain, I don't think it's a terrible idea to crank her up and let her idle for 10 minutes or so. That way, if there's any fuel leaks or she loses prime, we can deal with it right here and now in the tree shed and not out there on the side of the highway. So now all that's left to do before I show you exactly how to reset the change fuel filter notification and the fuel filter life in your truck is to reinstall our fender well.
See, that's what can happen. You just break them. Probably shouldn't use an impact. Only got one left. Probably be doing a video on how to back all those out of there.
Turn the key on, wait 5 seconds, and we'll push the brake and the gas to 100% for 10 seconds. But if you're interested in a more thorough explanation of this procedure, check for a link in the description for a short video showing the reset procedure step by step.
So I really hope you found this how to change a fuel filter for your 6.6 liter Duramax video helpful. And if you did, do me a quick favor and give the video a thumbs up so I'll know we're on the right track here. And of course, as always, if I missed anything or you have any thoughts or suggestions on how I can improve these videos, or really any comments on this Duramax
Fuel filter
in general, please leave a comment in the section below. I'd love to hear from you. And for those of y'all who are following along, those are beers number 136 and 137 on our way to finishing the Escape Power Sports 1000 Beer Challenge. So I'd like to encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss any of the rest of the maintenance or upgrade videos we'll be putting out on any of the Chevys we get in around here over the course of those 1000 beers. And on a serious note, I'd really like to thank the 700 or so of y'all who found some of the how-to content on this channel and decided to subscribe. And since I'm sure you probably came here for either Can-Am or Polaris, don't worry, as soon as I get caught up editing our How to Build a Log Shed series, we'll get right back to putting out videos about bikes. I'm Danny with Escape Power Sports. I really want to thank y'all for watching. And until next time, we'll see y'all on the trails.